Please welcome Darren Mowry, Country Manager at Amazon Web Services Nordics.
Good morning and welcome. As I look around here, I can't help but be humbled that you would not be outside in the weather that we're having and choose to be in this dark room with us. So we're going to make the most of that commitment that you've given us today. If you look around this room, you're going to see well over 1,000 people that you get to spend your day with today. And as I said, we're absolutely floored and truly humbled by the amount of interest that we've had to this year's summit. We're actually going to be spending the day doing a number of things, and here's the promise, the commitment that I make to you, and everyone that's wearing black shirts with an AWS logo will do the same. And that is, we want to inspire you today. We want to give you some new ideas and some new concepts that perhaps you hadn't thought about before. We want to educate you today. So we want to make sure you walk away with an entirely new understanding of how you can make some of these ideas that in the past may have seemed distant or challenging, but how you can actually go make those things real, leveraging the power of the cloud. But we also want to provide a forum where you can network with each other. And so if you look to your right and look to your left, you're seeing people that are leveraging the AWS cloud in an assortment of different ways. And this morning, what I want to do is give you a little bit of insight into AWS here in the Nordics and why I'm so thrilled to be a part of this organization and living here in Stockholm. But I also want to give you an idea of who else is in this room with you so that you can make sure and take advantage of that opportunity to get connected. So if you, obviously I said welcome. I'm not going to go through all of the translations of welcome, thank you, but I am working on each of them. But the important thing here is that while we have a very large percentage of the room here from Sweden, from all over Sweden, we have a very, very large number of people that are from Finland, from Norway. A number of our customers and partners from Denmark have joined us, and in fact, from all over Europe. So those of you that came from Germany today, thank you. A number of folks from countries in the Middle East have chosen to come join us today, as well as some guests from the United States. And so thank you again for the time that you've given us today, and we want to make the most of that. So one of the things that strikes me when I think about the Nordics is this phrase. The Nordics may be small in population, but the Nordics is absolutely massive when it comes to innovation. And it's something that AWS and that I and my team believe in firmly. We do things differently at AWS, as you may know. We're a company that releases technology at a breakneck pace. We released 722 significant releases or service updates last year alone. We're on track to far surpass that this year, and that makes us a little bit different. We also work to drive the cost out of IT. So the teams that work with me and the rest of our Nordic organization engage with customers and partners like yourself to get you to spend less on technology instead of more. And that makes us a little bit different. Where I think we're a perfect marriage for the Nordics is very different. There's a lot of traditional thinking, as you know, when you do business planning or when companies are determining the potential within a market. They look at population, they look at GDP. And they say those things mean that the market has potential. And what I'm most proud of about the Nordics, you here in the room and the work that we're doing, is we're proving that that doesn't apply anymore. That old school traditional thinking no longer applies when we think about innovation. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why we believe that this is that's an outdated way of viewing the potential in a market. $26 billion. That's not a small amount of money. And yet Gartner projects that $26 billion will be invested in IT services in the Nordics by 2018. $26 billion. Did you know that that makes the Nordics the 7th to 8th largest investor in technology services on the planet? That has nothing to do with a small population or a smaller GDP than a Germany. That has everything to do with an economy and a region that embraces technology and embraces innovation. And that's something we should all pause and be proud of. The concept of 10% of billion-dollar exits are actually coming from this part of the world, and yet 2% of the global GDP is coming from this part of the world. 10% of the world's billion-dollar exits are coming out of the countries that we call home. And that's different, and that's powerful. This, I think, is a compelling point, and some of you may know this, that $6.3 billion companies per 1 million people come out of the Nordics. That puts us second to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley creates $8.2 billion companies per million people. The Nordics is second in the world for creating fast-growing, innovative technology companies. That's different, that's powerful, and we need to be proud of the results that this part of the world is generating. And as many of you know, the whole concept of the startup health and the startup vitality in this market is just off the charts. In fact, many of you are from startups. Many of you may be joining us on the startup track today. And this really points to this final point here of we're the fourth largest startup market when you look at the amount of investment coming from private equity and from venture capital. You have Silicon Valley as number 1, you have New York as 2, and London as 3. The Nordics is then the 4th. And yet, as many of you may know, the Nordics is projected to pass the UK by the end of 2017 and be the world's 3rd largest startup market from a VC and investment perspective. So I go back to what I said. Some companies will look at the Nordics and they'll look at population and they'll look at GDP and say, interesting, but not a big market opportunity. We look at the Nordics and we wrap our arms around the Nordics and say, this is a highly motivated, highly educated, super innovative part of the world, and we're very, very happy to be able to be a part of this community. When you look around this room, I also wanted to give you an idea of the industries that are represented. Obviously, there's a very large percentage of you from high-tech companies, whether you're creating internet-based solutions, whether you're creating new products, but a lot of very technology-oriented companies here in the room today. Media and entertainment, and you can see down the list of financial services, fintech, manufacturing. There's a number of people here from higher education and our public sector organizations and customers as well. The interesting thing here is each one of these industries are embracing AWS in different ways. And so what you'll find over the course of the day today is you're going to have the opportunity to not only learn from each other, but you're also going to have the opportunity to learn from customers that have made hard choices and done an incredible amount of innovation leveraging the AWS platform. And we want to make sure and pass that information on to you. Also around this room, this is a very important and frankly quite humbling slide, piece of data for me. Almost half of you in the room are leveraging our platform to run at least one mission-critical system. In fact, 36% of the room are running multiple mission-critical applications, something that you would define as if it goes down, somebody's in trouble, customers aren't served, we lose revenue. And you're trusting our platform to run those applications and run those solutions. That is incredibly humbling for us, and again, something that we greatly appreciate. 10% of you in the room are doing interesting experimentation and dev test kinds of workloads, which is a phenomenal way to wrap your arms around AWS and to begin to transform your organization from perhaps more of a traditional model of developing to more of a DevOps-oriented concept, or for example, what you can learn from our friends at Volvo Wireless Car later in the day of continuous delivery and continuous innovation. 22% of you are dabbling with AWS today, meaning you may not be running it in a dev test workload or something in a mission critical, but you are experimenting, you're running small projects, and you're helping people get educated. The last point, I think, is also one of the most interesting. So 20% of those of you in the room today are not leveraging AWS in any material way, and yet you chose to come and spend your day with us today. And so what I ask you to do is, if you're one of the 20%, and you don't mind calling yourself out as one of the 20%, leverage the people here in this room to gain experience. Leverage the folks on my team who are wearing the shirts with the logos to ask whatever questions you can, because we want to make sure you walk away from today, as I said, energized, motivated, and educated, as well as connected. I want to take a moment, obviously, to thank those companies that have helped make today possible. First and foremost, our premier partner in NordCloud. I'm proud of NordCloud for a number of reasons. One being that they're a Nordic-based organization. While they were founded in Helsinki, they have a significant presence throughout the Nordics, and they have, as you can see, joined us here to ensure that we're able to provide you a fantastic event today. NordCloud's able to provide migration and strategic services. They're able to provide managed services as well. And they're able to complement that with training and development. So a definitely extremely strong partner of ours that we're very, very happy to be able to call a partner here in the Nordics. Obviously, I want to call out our gold sponsors here as well, an assortment of companies that have built businesses on not only helping you move to the cloud, but also help you manage and monitor your environment once you're here. And then also our silver and bronze sponsors. All of these folks are located in the large room that you just came from. And so please, on the breaks, take an opportunity to go learn more and build them into your networking opportunity over the course of the day today as well. Before I turn it over to the gentleman who's going to be leading us for the remainder of the keynote, I want to make sure and thank the customers that have agreed to participate, not only you yourselves as participants and learners, but also the dozens and dozens of organizations that have agreed to be a part of our content. One thing you should know about us is we prefer, in fact, we require that we have customers and partners delivering content in all of our events. While I would love to stand up on stage for hours and Ian would love to spend the day with you, it's just not the way that we work. We believe that you're going to get more out of the content by hearing it from real companies. So you'll learn from iZettle and Mojang today. You'll learn from Quinyx. You'll be able to tap into the knowledge from Assa Abloy and from Husqvarna and Volvo Wireless Car. So take an opportunity to look at the agenda and leverage those customers' experiences as well. So thank you again very, very much for committing your day to us today. We've got a phenomenal agenda ahead, and I'm convinced we're going to be able to motivate, inspire, and educate. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Ian Massingham. Ian is actually our Chief Evangelist here in Europe and has been able to help us do incredible things with our customers. He'll be driving us through a bit of an overview of the platform, and I think just beginning to do that inspiration that we've talked about. So thank you very much for your time today. And Ian, come on up.
Thank you, Darren, and it's great to be back here in Stockholm. Actually, this is the first of several trips that I'm going to be making to the Nordics over the coming month at AWS and other events. And I'm delighted to be here today. I was at this event last year supporting Werner, the CTO at Amazon.com, with the keynote, and I can say that this is way bigger than that was. We've got almost twice as many people, I think, joining us at the event today, which is great. I'm also delighted that I'm going to be joined on stage during this morning's keynote by some awesome technical and business leaders from some of the most innovative organizations here in the Nordics. I'd like to say thanks to the customer speakers that are going to be joining me throughout the course of the session up front before we kick off the main part of the keynote today. So, as Darren said, I'm in the evangelism team, leading the evangelism team at AWS here in EMEA, and I've been with Amazon Web Services since 2013, and I joined actually at a point at which we were going through an inflection, and really adoption of AWS was becoming much more mainstream around the 2013-2014 timeframe. Before that, I really started learning about AWS in my prior role around about 2010. And when I started doing research, serious research about the AWS cloud, I found that we were talking about AWS in these terms. We were talking about capital avoidance in infrastructure. We were talking about an elastic infrastructure where you only paid for the resources that you were making use of. And we're also talking about accelerating customers, helping them get new products and services to market much more quickly. And that was really the story of AWS from 2010 onwards. Since then, we've really changed how we talk to customers. I think customers have really changed the way in which they're adopting AWS. And the focus of the keynote this morning is going to be to focus on 3 of these transformational themes where using AWS can really make a difference to customers and the way in which they operate. Before we do that, I just want to set a bit of context about AWS growth and some of the customers that are using AWS's services today. So we're doing really well today in terms of customer adoption. We have around about 64% year-on-year growth, and we have over 1 million customers that are making use of AWS over the course of any 30-day period. When I say making use, these are active, non-Amazon accounts that are creating or making use of resources on AWS. So we've got really significant usage. And if you look at external perception of AWS, you'll find that that's also pretty positive. This is a quote actually from Gartner from their most recent Infrastructure as a Service Magic Quadrant, where they assess infrastructure as a service cloud providers. And what they said in the narrative that goes with their most recent report is that AWS is roughly 10 times the size of the next 14 providers. And that's in terms of the amount of capacity that we have in use on our services. And obviously, this has led to some recent financial success for Amazon Web Services. In our recent results, we've surpassed the $10 billion run rate. And this actually makes us the fastest growing enterprise technology provider in history. So adoption is really translating into results for AWS now as well. And we believe that we are the technology platform of choice for organizations of different types that are building applications and services in the cloud today. And this is really broad in terms of the different types of organizations that are using us. So taking a look at adoption in startups, actually at day one when AWS launched back in 2006, this was the primary use case for organizations that were building brand new technology products based on software. They would build on AWS. And we're really lucky that today this trend continues with organizations like Pinterest, Airbnb, Stripe, Slack. Slack is actually the fastest organization in history to reach a $2 billion valuation. Domo, Periscope, and others that are using AWS to build and scale some very innovative software-based companies. We're joined by several local examples of organizations like this on stage during the keynote. We've crossed the chasm now, obviously, and we've got, as Darren said in his intro, very significant adoption amongst enterprises. There's really too many logos on this slide to go into in a lot of detail. We've got usage across every conceivable vertical market, and also on a global basis, so in territories around the world, in, for example, oil and gas, healthcare, technology, manufacturing, financial services, of course, retail, and a really strong set of use cases in media also. If you want to know more about any of these use cases, maybe learn from organizations that are in industries similar to you, then you can find a ton more detail about all of these customer use cases on the AWS website in both video and written form. And I really would advise you, if you're in an enterprise, you're thinking about using AWS, try to look for organizations that got similar use cases to you and learn from the experience of those customers rather than making your own mistakes. In public sector as well, we've got strong adoption. Over 2,000 government agencies around the world using AWS. And this is supported by ecosystem partners, both systems integrators, a number of whom you can find here today. NordCloud, obviously, our gold sponsor here today, as well as other systems integration partners. And really the benefit that these organizations provide is in helping customers accelerate adoption of AWS so they can realize those benefits that much more quickly. And often, organizations do not want to staff or bring on large amounts of technology resource. They really don't see IT as a huge differentiator for them in terms of operating the services. So we also have a strong ecosystem of managed service providers that can assist with that as well. And then lastly, ISV adoption. And there's two halves really to ISV adoption of AWS. The first is obviously software providers offering software products that you can run on the cloud. This is facilitated by something called the AWS Marketplace, which I'm going to come to a little bit later on in this morning's session. And then secondly, ISVs themselves are transforming. We can all remember, actually you might be surprised how long ago this was, installing software on our machines and using maybe a DVD or a CD for that. And when you think about it, it's actually a long time since I did that, and probably a long time since most of you use traditional media for software installations. And of course, the delivery model for software is totally different today. It's all about services, subscription-based models, and paying simply for the features that you choose to use rather than heavy upfront licensing in a lot of cases. And ISVs are really making strong use of AWS to enable them to do that. Adobe is a great example of this with their Creative Cloud, the new delivery model for their creative products, which runs on AWS and represents a very, very large business for Adobe today with some really stringent security requirements around the creative assets that they manage and allow customers to create on the platform. Okay, so innovation using the cloud spans all industries. I just wanted to talk about a few of these use cases today, areas where the cloud has delivered really phenomenal benefits for some of these organizations. And these are across very different sectors, which I think nicely illustrates the kind of breadth of use cases that exist today. So Bristol-Myers Squibb, they're using AWS for simulation workloads, so it's high-performance computing. When I came to AWS in 2013, I was really surprised at the level of usage in this particular area, HPC in the cloud. It's a very common pattern. Obviously, the elastic nature of the AWS platform means that you can apply a ton of compute resources to difficult mathematical problems and solve those much more quickly than you might do in a more constrained environment. And in the case of Bristol-Myers Squibb, not only have they been able to reduce the time that it takes them to execute clinical trials through simulations, they're actually able to do a whole lot less clinical trials as well. And when you're talking about experimenting with drugs, reducing the amount of experiments that you need to do on human beings is actually a really good thing, okay? So they've delivered some really good benefits from that. Here in the Nordics, Supercell, I'm still amazed that some customers that I meet don't know the Supercell brand. I know it really well, because every time I open Clash Royale or Clash of the Clans, it pops up on my iPad. So I recognize it very clearly, but the brands of the games are often more well-known with customers. And Supercell use AWS to enable them to scale their mobile back-end platform to deal with millions of concurrent players in these mobile games. In my role, I talk to customers across all kinds of different sectors, all kinds of different vertical markets, and often talk to customers in finance about what they can learn from organizations like Supercell. Their system is one of the most elegant and large-scale distributed systems on the planet today, with millions of active users. They're able to use AWS with their recent launch, Clash Royale, which is a really cool card game, which you play on a tablet, to support millions of concurrent users when they launch that game. MLB, I guess there's not a lot of baseball fans in this room. Okay. Cricket, maybe? No. Okay, I'm in the wrong place for that. So Americans, Darren, I'm sorry if you're in the room, they love stats, right? Especially sports stats, okay? And MLB, Major League Baseball, they used AWS to enrich the experience for the fans by bringing real-time statistical analysis and real-time modeling to baseball. The way they did that was by putting missile radar into baseball stadiums around the US and using a data stream from these tracking systems to allow their fans to visualize what's happening in the game in real time in 3D on tablet or phone-based devices, whether they're watching in the stadium or maybe watching at home on TV. So it's all about deepening engagement for that provider of sports and getting more interaction with their sponsors and more interaction with their fans as a result. And then lastly, FINRA. This is a super interesting example for customers that might be operating in financial services markets that are regulated. Of course, FINRA is the North American financial regulator. It's one of the largest financial regulators in the world. They're ingesting billions of data points every day about securities trading in the US and using that to allow them to spot anomalistic or unusual patterns of trading that might indicate something should be investigated more closely by a human investigator. So it's a real big data, but also a highly regulated workload for a financial regulator. So one other industry that is being transformed today through innovation is payments. And this is both for consumers with the rise of mobile payment devices, but also for merchants, particularly in the small business segment. And to discuss this in a little bit more detail, I'd like to invite to join me on the stage Johannes Lufgren from iZettle, who is the head of DevOps for iZettle. He's going to join me and talk to me a little bit about some of the ways in which iZettle are using AWS today. So Johannes, please join me on the stage. Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Let me get my questions. So, the first thing I want to ask you, Johannes, could you introduce iZettle to the audience? Because there might be a few people here that haven't heard of iZettle. And also talk to me a little bit about the problem that you're solving for your customers.
Yes, iZettle is a financial tech company, and we're targeted towards small merchants. And we're best known for our mobile app, which transform your mobile device. It can either be your phone or your tablet into a point-of-sale device. And together with that, you have a small card reader where you can insert your payment card. And with chip and pin technology, which we use here in Europe and some other markets, which is the most secure one, you have a small portable mobile payment station and sales station.
Cool. And what does that mean for the customers that you serve? How does it help small businesses deal with payments?
Well, if you look at traditional solutions for this, they often come with a fixed fee. You might have longer contracts when you sign up for them. And we're basically, you need a very, very small, even zero investment at the moment to get running with us. You can get your free card reader right now on iZettle.com on the website. And we take a small portion of your payment as a fee.
Cool. And
Yeah.
what's your role at iZettle? What do you do for the organization?
Well, I am the head of DevOps, and I take care of the infrastructure from a technical and budget perspective.
Okay, cool. So winding back a little bit, can you talk a bit about when iZettle started building the payment solution And explain whether or not you started out on AWS or whether you moved to AWS after you built the product.
Absolutely. Since we're in a traditional business, in the summer of 2010, iZettle was started, and we started to deploy in a traditional hosting center. Where we need to comply with the payment card industry security standard, something called PCI DSS. So we found a hosting provider that was PCI DSS compliant and started from there. At the same time, though, we had our eyes on Amazon and AWS. So soon after this, we deployed our public website and also built a Cassandra cluster into AWS EC2 Classic. This is, back in the days, there was something called EC2 Classic, where you get an isolated public internet-facing instance in AWS. Very simple, very effective for public services.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was how you started, but obviously you've adopted AWS now. So what were the factors that motivated you to change that, to move away from that more traditional infrastructure and start making more significant use of the AWS cloud? Why do you do that?
Well, to understand, I can give you an example. iZettle grew from being present here in Sweden as the only market into being present in 3 continents within 2 years. And if you're going to build a backend that quickly, you need something. And the case with the card payments is that it's real-time processing involved. We used to read the little chip on the card. You need to have hardware cryptography involved in the backend, and also it becomes latency sensitive. I mean, imagine if you're standing as a customer making a payment and you have to wait that extra second. It's very annoying. You need a fast solution. So we knew we had to deploy locally to the markets we were deploying in, and this was in Brazil and in Mexico. And at the same time, we took a look at AWS VPC, that's Virtual Private Cloud, and saw that, well, this actually has the PCI DSS stamp on it, the compliance stamp on it. So we have a case. Let's go to the drawing board.
Okay, so how successful has that migration been for you since you took that decision? And what kind of benefits have you got from using AWS over the period that you have been doing so?
It's many. We are now migrated fully into AWS, even with our core functionality. Many of you may have a system that you only can have one of if you have like a large relational database with a master database, and so do we. And we took this step in February, migrated fully, and it's many benefits. I mean, we're centered here in Stockholm. The tech department is 80 people, and we're only in Stockholm, but we're running a distributed payment infrastructure around the world. And we want to be located here in Stockholm. So we need a good tool to manage it, and one provider is a key here. Yeah, and also you have your API, which gives us the chance to automate parts of the infrastructure, like taking down, rearranging stuff.
Okay, that's great. So you sound like your usage of the API, tackling some of these compliance challenges, you sound like a relatively advanced user of AWS, and you might have seen in Darren's slide that there's around about 30% of the people here that are either completely new to AWS or just experimenting with it. So if you had to give the audience a piece of advice to help them maximize the benefit from using AWS, what might one piece of advice be that you would give to the people that are here today?
That would be, if you're running in sort of a complex business with a lot of security demands or compliance needs that we do, you shouldn't be too scared to go all in a solution like AWS, because it's definitely worth it if you see other benefits in it. And once you've done it, what happened to us, we have to do these yearly audits and PCI audits, and they came back to us and said, well, thanks for showing us such a new, innovative solution. We've never seen something like this. And you can actually change that part of the industry as well, the compliance and auditing and all the boring parts.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of AWS people in the room as well, and whenever I'm doing one of these interview-style discussions with a customer, I always try to get a bit of advice for us. So is there anything that you would have AWS do or change from a services perspective so that we could serve you more effectively?
Well, there is one technical thing. I talked about the VPC earlier, and in the VPC you have a service that's called VPN connection, and it's very neat because you can connect your existing infrastructure to AWS using IPsec and VPN technology. We use it to interconnect our different regions because they are isolated in AWS. However, you can't use the service to connect to itself. You need to have an active device, like a deployed instance in each region to connect to the service in another region. And that would be a neat feature.
Cool. I'm sure there's some networking essays in the room that will be scribbling notes right now and remembering that. So thank you very much. That's great, Johannes. I'd like to thank you for joining me on stage. That's cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so super to hear from a customer like iZettle that's running such a critical and security, a service with such needs for security compliance in AWS as our first speaker. I want to spend the rest of the session today talking about a few patterns for innovation that we see. So customers that are really successful on AWS, like iZettle and the other 3 customers that you're going to hear from in the keynote today, we can take a view over those and all of the other customers that we have, and we're lucky that we can observe some common characteristics that customers tend to share before they become really successful with the cloud. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about for the rest of the session. So, and this, in the main part, is going to be about startup innovation, the event today. My third pattern, my third trend, is really much more focused on people that have got existing IT that they need to change, okay? So if you're working in an enterprise, I got something for you at the end, okay? So, first of all, removing constraints, okay? And to talk about this in more detail, I'm going to give you a quick tour of the AWS service portfolio, try to illustrate to you how you can use these services to allow yourselves and your development and creative teams to unburden themselves of some heavy lifting that can be a big distraction in creating and operating applications, okay? And at AWS, we've spent the last over 10 years, actually, filling out a portfolio of services that are really intended to help customers do that, to allow customers to defocus on things that aren't important and spend way more time on the things that really do differentiate customers, serving their customers with new and innovative products and services, scaling into new geographies and new regions, maybe meeting a high bar for security and compliance that they have to meet in order to operate. And those services have been built on a solid foundation of physical infrastructure. This is comprised of AWS regions. Now, we have 12 of these regions around the world today, and it's important to note that a region is not a data center. This is still a misconception, unfortunately, that I always try to clear up. A region is a data center cluster. The data centers are organized into what we call availability zones, or AZs, okay? And each one of those availability zones contains between 1 and 6 physical data center facilities. And you can use the logical grouping of availability zones to distribute your application or infrastructure and meet the highest levels of availability, protecting yourselves from things like natural disasters, power failures, and network interruptions. So always distribute mission-critical apps across these availability zones that we provide. 12 regions today. We actually have 5 more coming by the end of 2016 or early in 2017. So we're going to add regions in Ohio, Montreal in Canada, India, Ninjexia in China, and an additional region here in Europe, in the UK, last quarter this year or early next. The regions themselves are complemented by 54 edge locations, and we use these edge locations to support services where latency is a critical factor and latency needs to be minimized. So it's things like content distribution, DNS, our web application firewall, which I'll come to later, and one other distributed service. We also have a suite of services for enterprises that you can see here in gray that we've been adding to quite recently with services like virtual desktops with our workspaces offering, corporate email with Workmail, and collaboration with WorkDocs. And we have the marketplace, which I mentioned earlier. Now, the marketplace is an undiscovered gem for many AWS customers, and it's something that I really would recommend customers spend more time to investigate and learn a little bit more about. It's used widely. Over 205 million run hours of software are consumed from the AWS marketplace every single month. That's up from 143 million hours just in October last year. So it's a service that's gaining significant adoption. There are over 2,600 different software products there. We provide a simple e-commerce experience that enables you to find, select, and activate software in AWS very simply. And quite often, the software products themselves are billed in the same way as AWS resources, hourly consumption through your AWS account. So it's a very simple mechanism for acquiring software, either for trials and experimentation or for long-term production use. And we've got quite a few marketplace vendors such as Trend that have joined us here today, and I'd recommend that you spend a little bit of time with those guys, understanding their products and also understanding the procurement acquisition model that you can use here. Moving on from those services into some of the core infrastructure services, compute is obviously a foundational service that many AWS customers use. You've heard a little bit about EC2 instances already as Johannes was speaking. We have a broad selection of different instance types that meet different workloads. In fact, we've got twice as many instance types as our nearest competitor, and we have instances for general purpose use, high performance computing, as I mentioned earlier, workloads with high memory. Maybe you're doing rendering or computational fluid dynamics and you need access to a high performance GPU, floating point units. We have an instance with GPU type processors available to it. High I/O, and we also have a special type of instances called dedicated instances, which are ideal for certain compliant workloads. Okay, so you can find an instance that matches your use case, matches your application type from that catalog that we provide. Similarly, for databases, 6 different database engines supported within our RDS service. And here we spent a lot of time focusing on making availability and data protection very simple for customers to achieve with services like multi-AZ replication, where you can take a copy of your database, maintain that synchronously with a master database, and keep that copy in another one of those availability zones that I mentioned earlier. So you can build, again, to the highest level of availability and data protection using these services with just a few clicks of your mouse in the console or a couple of commands in our CLI. It's really very simple to access these resources, and access resources which for a long time were really restricted to the very largest organizations with the deepest pockets and the most capital resources. Even an individual developer can build on this kind of platform today, which is a pretty cool feature of the cloud in my view. And then more recently, we've added database migration services, enabling you to move from your on-premises or privately owned and operated databases to their AWS equivalents, and even switch engines as you do that to reduce the costs of running your databases and also boost performance characteristics for you as well. I'll return to that migration services theme at the very end of today's session. So, another area that we spend a lot of time on, and we've touched upon this a little bit already with Johannes' talk, is access control and security and compliance. It's a huge area for AWS. We spend a lot of time investing in features here that help customers meet compliance obligations, govern the way they use the cloud so they can separate duties and make sure that only the right individuals in their teams have access to the resources that they need. We do this with a service called Identity and Access Management, which provides extremely fine-grained access control over specific AWS resources. If you're new to AWS, whether you're an InfoSec professional or not, it's a very worthwhile way to spend your time learning a little bit about IAM and how you can use that to build the right security structure for your resources. If you build these foundations out correctly at day one, make your long-term success with AWS a little bit more likely. Okay, so finally I want to talk about storage. And there's a couple of things to say about storage. First of all, it's actually 10 years in March this year since we launched our first storage service, Amazon S3, and I'll return to that a little bit later, but a foundational service that customers can use to store and retrieve data with very high durability characteristics. Since then, we've launched other services focusing on block storage. So these are devices that you can attach to your EC2 instances. We call this service EBS, the Elastic Block Store. And here we use both solid state and rotational drives to allow customers to access the right performance characteristics at the right price point for their services. Typically, the solid state drives are used for these latency sensitive transactional workloads where you need consistently high IOPS. And we provide a burst model as well as a provisioned IOPS model, so you can build the right kind of storage infrastructure to match your needs. We've been thinking recently about whether there's innovation opportunities available here, particularly with magnetic media, which still offers, believe it or not, the best price performance for sequential read workloads, where you're going to stream large volumes of data from storage and process that. And with this in mind, we've announced recently 2 new EBS volume types that are built specifically for this workload pattern, for these high-volume sequential read workloads. They offer a step change in performance, they're significantly more performant rather than pre-existing services that we've had on EBS. So you can compare that 500 megabytes per second throughput with the 320 megabyte per second throughput that our PIOPS, provisioned IOPS volumes offer. You can see that this is around about 40% more performant. And the cold volume type, the SC1 that we've also announced, is actually more price efficient, more cost efficient than Amazon S3. So it offers an extremely low cost destination for storing data that you might want to process with something like an Amazon Elastic MapReduce cluster. Okay, and we've got out of the box, there's no box with the cloud, out of the gate support with EMR for these volumes. They're ideal, as I said, for processing logs or other large data sets that you want to process through streaming services. They're also a very good fit for services like Apache Kafka if you're going to run that on AWS in order to manage streaming data with your own software infrastructure. Okay, so a quick update on block storage volumes. And actually, we've got significant usage of these services already in a private beta that we're running with some customers. One of these, which I find absolutely amazing, really, Localytics. Okay, it's a lifecycle engagement platform for web and mobile apps. This sounds, I mean, you can say something like this today, it sounds normal, but before I read these numbers to you, I just want to remind you that a few years ago this was impossible, okay? So they're serving 37,000 apps with analytics, and their software is installed on 2.7 billion devices, okay? I just want to think a second about what you might have to build if you wanted to do that yourself in your own data center. I spent the early part of my career working in high-volume services for internet service providers. We had millions of subscribers, okay, and it was very difficult to architect and engineer systems to do that. This is a 2.7 billion endpoint application that they're running on AWS, making use of these new volume types. It actually took 50% out of their monthly storage costs by adopting these new volumes. And we have other customers that you can see here, as well as ecosystem partners like Splunk that are making use of these volumes in their operational intelligence platform as well, through the private beta that we've been running. These volume types are available today, and you can make use of them in all regions. Okay, so we heard a little bit about compliance at the top of today's session. It's very difficult to get benefits out of moving fast if you have to sacrifice control. And for a long time, there's been a trade-off in IT, which is you've got to choose between whether you want the ability to iterate quickly and release new products and services fast, or whether you want to maintain the control structure that's required to meet security or compliance obligations that you might have. And for a long time, choosing option 2, the security option, meant that you'd have to trade off the ability to move very quickly. And we've got a big focus at AWS on trying to help customers avoid having to take that decision, to allow them to combine those two attributes. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is on accreditations and certification. And this really goes back to my initial theme of avoiding the requirement for customers to take on a lot of heavy lifting. With these accreditations and certifications, what AWS does is we apply a control structure to our infrastructure and services. We have around about 1,800 different security controls that we apply. And then we have these controls that we apply audited through a number of common information security and compliance standards. Things that are super relevant here in Europe, as you've heard, are things like PCI DSS and the ISO 27001 information security standard. But for organizations in the US, there are others like SOC 1, 2, and 3 controls, FedRAMP for providers that are working with the US federal government, and other accreditations as well. And we provide a very clear set of documentation and white papers that are intended to make it very clear what we do as part of our security obligations to you, our customers, and what responsibilities you need to take on in order to gain accreditation and certification for the applications and services that you build on top of our platform, okay? A lot of work goes into this. And if you're needing us to do something from a security perspective that you feel we don't do today, We'd love to get your feedback on that, so you should talk with our security and compliance specialist teams here in Europe. Very keen to get your feedback on how we can extend our certification and compliance coverage if you do need something that we don't do today. Now, at a technical level, obviously got a services portfolio that provides a toolkit for customers that want to secure their applications, services, and infrastructure. You've heard a little bit already about virtual private cloud. Enables you to provision a logically isolated section of the AWS cloud where you can launch your resources inside a virtual network, and you have complete control over traffic flows, routing, and what other services you place inside that VPC in order to add additional security controls and services that you might need. In addition to that, we announced at reInvent last year a web application firewall. As I said earlier, this is distributed across those 54 edge locations around the world that we operate, and it enables you to protect your web applications from common web exploits at the edge of the network. Okay, so you can filter traffic that might be malicious or unwanted right out at the edge, and that will never reach your origins running back in those AWS regions around the world. So it's a very scalable and robust service for that reason. With identity, as I mentioned earlier, enabling you to use identities that you manage in the cloud to control access to AWS resources, but also to federate in identities from your own identity providers. If you've got Active Directory or something else, you can bring those IDs in and use them. And then more recently, we've done a lot of work on encryption, a very important area for customers. We've had a lot of demand for this. We've had a lot of new services. KMS, we recently launched an encryption SDK that enables you to integrate our managed keys into your Java applications to encrypt application secrets and other data. And similarly, a lot of work over the more recent period into compliance. This is really a set of tools that enable you to establish guardrails for governance and control of your AWS resources and services with things like our service catalog, services like AWS config and AWS config rules, enabling you to automatically monitor configurations and also to automatically remediate configuration breaches. So if somebody does something that's outside of policy, you can fix that in the platform without a human being having to work on that particular activity or issue. Okay? And we recently added another new service to this area, which is called Amazon Inspector. We announced this in preview at AWS reInvent last October. We've recently announced general availability in 4 regions, including the EU Ireland region. And what Inspector is a system, a service, to enable you to monitor application security. So you can run it on EC2 instances of your choosing. It will assess network, virtual machine, operating system, and application configuration. Has a built-in content library using things like the CVE, Common Vulnerability Exposure Database. It will provide you with a detailed dashboard of these audit reports and also the capability to log an audit trail of when you've tested your application's security and integrate this service with, for example, continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines through our SDKs, API, and CLI tools. So you can move application inspection from a one-off activity into something that happens as a component of every single build or deployment that you do with AWS. Got early adoption here as well, where we've got several customers, once again, that have been part of a private beta for this service and have worked quite extensively with it during the preview. And then more recently, as you might expect, many AWS ecosystem partners have picked up Inspector and started to integrate it with their products. Organizations like Splunk and Sumo Logic from a dashboarding and log analytics perspective, and then Trend Micro, Alert Logic, and others providing integration with their existing intrusion detection and protection systems. So again, I'd advise you to take a look at that if you're running security critical workloads in the AWS cloud. What we think by combining these services together with our approach to compliance accreditation is that you really don't need to make that choice anymore. You can establish these guide rails now for your infrastructure running on AWS, and that can enable you to move very, very quickly whilst at the same time maintaining the right security and compliance posture for you and for the customers that you serve. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is simplification. How can you use the cloud to further reduce the amount of stuff that you need to do? How can you really refocus the maximum amount of your effort on activities that benefit your customers? And I think a customer that's got a great example of this is a local customer called educations.com Media Group, and to talk a little bit about the work that educations.com have been doing to simplify their infrastructure using AWS. And they've been doing this for quite a while. They started using AWS back in the 2008 to 2009 timeframe. I want to invite to the stage Marcus Bostrom, who is the CTO and founder at educations.com Media Group. Marcus.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcus and I'm co-founder and CTO of Educations.com Media Group. EMG was founded in 2001 by me and two friends. We were just finished high school and we started to look for universities. We quickly realized that at that time there existed no good portals where you can see all the options that you had in front of you and where you could easily compare different schools and programs. So we decided to do something about it, and we started our first portal, Studentum.se, to help people discover and compare different educations. The site was a success in terms of traffic, and we soon also realized that schools need to market themselves in order to fill their courses. And a student is, in a way, a customer to a school, so this is what we do. We help schools to recruit more students, and we help students to find their dream education and dream school. Today we're about 140 employees. We have portals in over 10 countries, and we serve about 3 million visitors on our websites each month. And we hope to grow that substantially in the coming years. So what was the challenge for us? Well, back in 2008, we had problems with our servers. They were crashing. And that caused downtime and a lot of stress on the tech team. And being a small organization meant that me and our best developers need to go to the data center located in Liljeholmen. And for everyone who has been working in a data center, it's not a nice working environment. It's either too cold, it's either too hot, it's noisy, you never get any good coffee. So another problem we had was also that scaling up took some time. Buying a new server and installing it took weeks. And we need to be able to do that more quickly. Also, scaling down was impossible. I mean, you can't sell a server, not easily anyway. So all in all, it was not a good solution, so we started to look for alternatives. Back then, I only knew Amazon as a bookstore where you could buy programming books. But I had read an interesting article when the CEO and founder of Amazon had instructed his tech teams he forbid them to use in-process communication to share data. And he said that you have to use like external APIs or web APIs. And I thought that that article was very interesting, and it felt like, yeah, these guys are really onto something good. So I started to look into Amazon a bit more. At that time, if you Googled AWS, you didn't end up at Amazon Web Services, you ended up at American Welding Foundation. So yeah, it's better now. They are more known now than they were back then. But we had already been experimenting with some cloud services. We kicked out the Exchange server and used the Google Apps, and that worked very well. So we felt that we were ready for some more cloud. And we did a comparison with Microsoft Azure. And at that time, according to my opinion, it felt like Microsoft were a few years behind on the cloud. Also, Azure offered quite little control over the production environment. And I thought that that would not work so good for us. We also didn't want to become more Microsoft addicted. I mean, I love Microsoft, part of Microsoft. We have a .NET platform, we do C#, and that works great. But everything that Microsoft does is not perfect. And it's nice to have some alternative providers for the hosting and platforms. So scalability and redundancy were the reason we joined Amazon Web Services. But since we joined in 2008, 2009, there's been a really impressive development of new services. The pace of innovation is very high, and I would say that's the main reason that we are staying. So how do we use AWS? Short answer is we use it a lot. I don't have time in this presentation to go through everything, but I will give you a few highlights. First of all, we have all web and backend servers running EC2 virtual servers, and we run Windows Server and IIS. We work with Lambda for event-driven functions, and we love to see some future C# support maybe. We use load balancing for web servers and backend. And we are working to get better on auto-scaling. We still treat our servers as pets and not as cattle. They have names. But we are working on it. We use S3 quite a lot, and we have used it for some time, but we realized lately what a brilliant service S3 is. It's super powerful. And especially, we like to store usually JSON data models, and you can do some really good stuff with a simple service as S3. Otherwise, we use CloudFront to deliver the content. We have users all over the world, from Brazil to Japan to Asia, and it's very important that they get a good experience visiting our websites. And CloudFront edge locations helps us to achieve that. We just finished a really big project replacing our search, which is an important part of our website. It was custom built before, and now we replaced it with AWS Elasticsearch. And we just recently launched it, and it will be a great achievement because managing the code base of our custom search was a hassle. So that project, I just want to mention something. That project started when I was in Silicon Valley, and by chance I visited the AWS search team. AWS bought a company called A9, and I met some really knowledgeable and friendly AWS staff, and they gave inspiration to this project. So if I can encourage you to do something, then you should meet more with the AWS staff, because you always get ideas and inspiration for new projects. Finally, we really like the application services like SNS and SQS, and we send all transaction emails using SES. So how do we benefit from this? I would say, first of all, we have a nice separation of responsibilities. We want to focus on software development, not hosting, and Amazon helps us to do that. Also, we get access to an extremely scalable environment. I would say your wallet is the only limit for how much you can scale it. And you can build a super high availability, and that's very difficult to do yourself. We tried it, and it's much easier to use when someone else has invested billions of dollars in infrastructure. Then we have the global reach, which I just talked about before. We just launched a website in China, so I love to see how the data center in China will work out, if we can sneak through the Great Firewall. And finally, access to all the innovation, the new services that Amazon provides, helps us to save time and produce things that would otherwise not be possible. So how would our future relationship with AWS look like? First of all, we continue to use the existing services. We will also try out new services. We'll look into AWS application offerings. I will look at QuickSight as a business intelligence solution, because it will fit our architecture and data stores very well. So if it just fits our business needs, it will be quite easy for us to implement. And finally, we will meet more with AWS staff, and we will attend more AWS events for knowledge sharing, to discover best practices, and to get help with some specific challenges. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you, EMG Tech Team. You are the best.
That's great, thank you. Thank you, Marcus. So I wanted to just drill into a couple of the services that Marcus talked about in his discussion there of how they've simplified their architecture by making more use of AWS services and less use of servers. The first one of these that I wanted to talk about is S3. It's a service that we've talked about a little bit already. And believe it or not, I could probably spend an hour, I've done plenty of sessions where I've spent an hour talking just about S3 features. It's a simple storage service, but because it's been around 10 years, as I said earlier in the session, we've really added a lot of features to it. And the model that we use, of course, is to allow customers to prioritize which features we're going to add to each one of our services next. And when you think about it, iterating over that sort of time frame, consistently adding the next priority for customers that are using a service or maybe that aren't using it because you're missing something, gives you a broad range of features that appeal to a variety of different use cases. And as we've added those features, we haven't compromised on these core attributes: simplicity, scalability, the fact that the service is low cost and cost has declined over time as we've reduced pricing. It's very reliable and it offers low latency access to data. And combined together, these characteristics means that it's not just a high volume object store, it can also be used, as Marcus said, as a replacement for traditional relational databases if you're storing JSON objects inside the service. And that's quite a common pattern, actually. So the first building block that we have in the AWS portfolio for building super high scale or internet scale apps is Amazon S3 as a mechanism for storing data. Much more recently, we've been giving thought to how we can apply the same approach to all application components. So this is over the last couple of years. And we added a new service 2 years ago called AWS Lambda, which once again Marcus did mention briefly during his presentation there. This is a service for running your code in the AWS cloud without having to provision EC2 instances. So you can upload what we call cloud functions or Lambda functions written in JavaScript, Java, or in Python. We will provision the execution resources that you need for those pieces of code to be run at any scale on the basis of them being triggered by events. So we have the same characteristics of simplicity, low cost, ease of use, but with no servers to manage, no servers to provision, and no servers to procure. And we provide a sub-second metering capability here. And it's not uncommon to hear customers talk about cost reduction using AWS Lambda in the order of 100 or 1,000 times cheaper than building services on the EC2 platform. Okay? You can start at 0 and your environment will scale elastically in accordance with the amount of functions, the amount of instances of your functions that you need to run concurrently. This service has been around for 2 years. As I said, we launched it at AWS reInvent in 2014. And since then, the adoption of Lambda has been nothing short of remarkable, really. It's been used across a huge variety of different use cases by customers of all types, and in some cases at incredibly high volume. You could take AdRoll, for example, here. Not a well-known brand outside of ad tech, but they're an organization that gives advertisers on the internet that uncanny ability to follow you from website to website to website and retarget you with advertising that might be relevant to your interests. Ever wondered why you're reading the news, visit a different website, and the same car or electronics ad follows you across those two properties? Well, it's organizations like AdRoll that do that. And they store over 300 terabytes of compressed data in S3 every month. Each time a new piece of data is added, it updates their model, and that model update is executed using a Lambda function that operates at whatever scale they need for the current update volume. You could also look at Periscope, well-known real-time video broadcast service. Here, video that is streamed by the service is broken down into 3-second chunks, and each 3-second chunk is processed by Lambda looking for blocked content that might not be in compliance with the terms of service for Periscope, so looking for illegal or other regulated content that shouldn't be broadcast. There are 4 primary use cases for Lambda I just want to focus on briefly. So the first is serverless web applications, combining client-side HTML and JavaScript together with our API gateway, using identities that are provided using another AWS service called Cognito that I'll return to later. And each action in the web application is implemented as a separate Lambda function. Those functions are called by the API gateway, and they persist state in DynamoDB, so there is no traditional 3-tier model for this kind of architecture. One great example you can see here is Bustle. They're a women's fashion brand in the US. They've recently migrated to Lambda, and they said that the cost of running this website that can serve millions and millions of visitors is just incredibly low, out of all proportion in terms of the reduction to what their previous costs were. Second common pattern is data processing. This is similar to what I described to you with AdRoll. There's another use case here with FireEye. FireEye is an intrusion detection system that can be used to monitor and respond to security events. Once again, it's built on top of the AWS Lambda platform. You can see here they're using cascading functions, so one Lambda function written in JavaScript triggering multiple other functions that have specific operational functions. And here, once again, they've achieved an 80% cost reduction in comparison to the costs of running a pre-existing service that was built on Elasticsearch running on EC2. So they've taken 4/5 out of their cost model for running this service. The third pattern is IoT. If anybody's not seen this device before, this is an Amazon Echo. This is a hands-free speaker device that you can control with your voice, literally asking it to do things. Alexa, play me some Calvin Harris, or Alexa, add some carrots to my shopping list, or Alexa, who are the champions of the Premier League? And it will report back to you. Now, behind the scenes, each time you make a request of Alexa, a Lambda function is being triggered. It's being passed in an object that contains the speech that you've just spoken to the service that's been passed. And then it performs computation on that and sends back speech that the device is to play back to you. So the platform is extendable. We call these extensions skills, and we call the framework for developing them the Alexa Skills Kit, or ASK. Okay? It's very easy to access. There's a complete guide for this on the Amazon Echo developer site, and if you're interested in developing for the Echo, I'd encourage you to take a look at that. There are also many other IoT use cases that can be supported using these Lambda functions. And then fourthly, connective tissue for AWS environments. What do I mean by that? So it's a service that enables you to process events from other AWS services. And by doing that, it enables you to extend the automation capabilities of the AWS cloud. And there's some great examples of this in a variety of different areas. Three that I want to quickly talk about. First of all, Capital One. So this is a financial services institution that operates globally. It's one of the largest retail banks in North America. They embarked on a project to build a higher level of compliance for their applications. And the outcome of this project is an open source project that you can find on GitHub called the Capital One Cloud Custodian. They process CloudWatch events, and they provide advanced remediation capabilities based on those events to ensure that they stay within the compliance guide rails that are required for their particular workload. So if you're interested in that, find it on GitHub. It's called Cloud Custodian. There's a similar example where AWS and other members of the user community have worked to extend our own config rules service. Once again, we're building additional compliance guide rails that you can choose to use in your AWS account or in specific environments. And again, you'll find another GitHub repo. This time it's under AWS Labs on GitHub, which contains a broad selection of community-contributed rules where smart developers have built additional automation hooks for config rules that meet the compliance needs of their organizations, and they've contributed that to the community for reuse. Okay? And then lastly, with CloudWatch events also, you can use a cron-style function to trigger Lambda functions on a specific schedule. So you can do scheduling as well as an additional feature with Lambda functions combined with CloudWatch logs. And we have adoption in the ecosystem as well with tools like Splunk that are making use of some of this functionality to provide additional operational intelligence for customers. So a very powerful set of tools for extending AWS. Last thing that I want to focus on very quickly here is DynamoDB. This is a service that's been around a little bit longer than Lambda. We launched it around about 4 years ago. And once again, adoption of this service has been really significant. It shares similar attributes to the other services that I've talked about. Very simple to use, very, very scalable, very, very low cost, extremely reliable, and it provides consistent low latency access to data that you store in the service. So it's a fully managed, non-relational database that runs inside AWS that offers very consistent performance characteristics. And you can see that customers are using this at really, really high scale. We've got organizations like Expedia, they're processing 200 million events every single day using DynamoDB. Or Myriad, not a brand that you'll know, but they're providing SMS and WhatsApp-style communication services to carriers in Central America. They have 130 million users that have activated on the service in the course of 1 year, okay, via these white labeling arrangements that they have with mobile carriers, and they're using DynamoDB at the back end to store message state and enable message interchange between their subscribers, or beat packing, where they've driven growth of about 2 million users in 7 months, and they're storing about 20,000 events per second in DynamoDB all the time, and peaking to about 100,000 events per second in the really busy time of the day for them. So if you're building a high scalability internet application and you need data persistence, DynamoDB is an excellent place to look for that. So the general trend here that we're seeing is this move from servers to services, and adoption of what's become known now as a serverless architectural model, where there are no EC2 instances, there are no RDS databases, there are a collection of coupled components where the complexity of operating those components is entirely offloaded from you and is carried by AWS. Okay, so the next theme that we're going to talk about, now that we've talked a little bit about you doing less, is about how you can get more out of data and get more out of the relationships that you have with customers by using that data. So how can you observe patterns, predict outcomes, and connect with customers more effectively? And this is about shifting into a data-driven model, where your organization's patterns and direction are driven by real analytics that you gain from insights into how your customers are using your services, okay? And we have a variety of different services that span this use case. Think of it, if you want, as a set of building blocks that you can use to build data-centric applications. We've already heard a little bit about S3, our data store of record. We've already heard a little bit about DynamoDB and RDS. We also have a suite of services for running parallel analytics clusters. We have a service called Elastic MapReduce. It provides a managed framework for running Hadoop and Spark workloads in the AWS cloud. More recently, we announced a managed Elasticsearch service, which you heard a little bit about from Marcus. Streaming data with Kinesis streams, predictive analytics with machine learning, and a petabyte scale data warehouse that you can provision in AWS in just a few minutes in the form of Amazon Redshift. Now, I'm going to invite a customer to the stage here, a customer whose whole business depends on using data and depends upon their ability to access it in a timely and reliable manner in order to provide their product. So Matthias Tyberg, who is the CTO at Strossle, is going to join me on stage and talk a little bit about this theme. So Matthias, please come up.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Matthias Tyberg. I'm the CTO of Strossle. I joined last year when my previous startup was acquired by Strossle. So, don't we all love reading news articles? All of us have a need of getting what's happening right now. But the problem for news sites are that they have big competition from different apps or ecosystems where people or companies want you to stay within that niche. So we are a solution for publishers to help them stay longer on their site and create an ecosystem around publishers. We would say we are the publishing platform. You probably have used us, even though you might not know our name. Underneath many news articles in Sweden and also in Europe, you have a read more article, and you have a widget where you have related content, related articles from the site. You have native advertising, and you also have links to external partners. And in our case, it's not people paying for this. They share links between publishers to create the best user experience for you that are reading the newspaper. So we started 3 years ago. We are right now 50 people, headquartered in Stockholm. We are in 9 different countries and growing fast. So 3 new this year, but adding a few more, at least. We have our development team in Malmö, and of course that makes it important to have this very scalable and focusing on that part. When looking at our challenges, we have two main challenges for us. First of all, it's a big challenge to just have an infrastructure that can support one publisher. And in our case, we have many publishers. And publishers have not a predefined number of visitors. If there's a breaking story, they get tens or hundreds of times more visitors. And we don't have one publisher, we have 500 publishers. That means that the time ramp up in traffic could be enormous. In our case, it's also an issue regarding the fast growth. We have a goal to grow at least 10% each month, both in revenue but also in traffic. So we need to have a very scalable system for this. When looking at the infrastructure, we had three components that we needed to focus on. First of all, we saw that we need to have microservices at using this system, because otherwise it would not be possible for us to build this kind of scalable system. We choose to use Docker since the company was founded 3 years ago, and that was the best of that time. We also see that we need to use some sort of cache layer, since although we do all recommendations in real time, we don't want pictures and images to put a lot of load on our servers. And at the same time, we also want to have auto-scaling. And for us, that's a key component, both related to the capability of getting this to work, but also regarding the money. And I'll get back to that later. So these are the key components that we are using right now. We are all in Amazon. My previous company was all in Amazon, so I've been all in Amazon for 8 years. And if we look at the EC2, we are using Docker to put on the EC2s. For each of the recommendations that we do, we send those down to one of the microservices that then selects and do the best recommendations for each person. And at the same time, we have an ad server that does the same. What might be very special for us is that we are using a lot of Spot instances. Since we chose to build this in a way, it should be extremely scalable. It should be auto-scaling. So we have around 50% of our production in Spot instances. And we also have used CloudFront for the layer of images. And since we have publishers all over Europe, it's really important that images load fast. It's very important that the quality is good and the feeling is native. So the reason why most of you guys have not heard of us is because the feeling of what we deliver is that it's from the publisher's website. And CloudFront helps us with that. Regarding data, last month was the first that we did more than 1 billion recommendations per month. So we have billions and billions of events each month that needs to be stored, need to be statistic upon. We need to do recommendations. So we are moving more and more into Redshift. We have two different projects, one regarding statistics, where we use Redshift, and one regarding machine learning, where we use machine learning on top of Redshift to do these recommendations as good as possible for you. So in our case, would this have been possible if we would buy hardware and have our own server hall? Absolutely not. Where I come from, this was not a choice. It was, if we would have this business, we need to have an infrastructure that can handle really high, fast ramp-ups. So for us, this high growth in traffic for publishers that could ramp up in a few minutes, we need to have a very scalable system. And at the same time, for us, also, we are only 20 developers. We want our developers only focus on getting the best code out there, not focusing on whether a hard drive is broken somewhere. So that is the only way for us moving forward. Looking more into what kind of things do we see One of my key challenges is, of course, the team. We need to hire a lot of people. So if you're ever down in Malmö, please come by and take a coffee. But from a service perspective, we are focusing a lot of Redshift and machine learning. So as I used to say, we want to be the main machine learning team in South Sweden. We might be the only machine learning team in South Sweden, but we should be the best one. And Redshift is a key component there. We're also using Spark a lot to do this type of analysis. So basically what I want you to take home today is that we want to help the publishers to make their full potential. Thank you very much for listening.
That's great, thank you. Thank you, Matthias. Okay, so we're going to move on now and talk a little bit about getting data into the cloud. Obviously, before you can work on your data, you need to get it into AWS. And in doing that, there are several different options. One of the most common for larger enterprises is to use a service that we've got called Direct Connect. It enables you to establish a low latency, high bandwidth connection directly from your network or data center straight into an AWS region of your choice. We have infrastructure locations called AWS Direct Connect POPs that facilitate this through direct connections. One of the best examples of this actually comes from the UK, where I'm obviously based. The BBC, which is the largest state broadcaster in the UK, every day they ship about 21 terabytes of video content over a pair of these AWS Direct Connect connections, transcode it, and play it out in a very popular video-on-demand service called BBC iPlayer, which is the largest video-on-demand service in the UK. So you can send data at very high volumes using that service. Getting away from that long-term persistent connectivity option, there are, again, several different options that customers choose to use to get data into the cloud. One of these is for small and infrequent packages or parcels of data or events that you might want to send into the cloud for processing, or maybe to use to update, for example, a machine learning model. And we have a service here called Amazon Kinesis, which we introduced around about 2 years ago. It's a platform for ingesting real-time streaming data at any scale. It's very flexible, and it allows customers to build their own apps or use existing frameworks like Spark, which Matthias just mentioned briefly, where you might integrate Kinesis with Spark streaming, for example, to build real-time analytics dashboards or update a machine learning model. We do the ingesting, and you do the processing, so we maintain a reliable sequence stream of data that you can work upon. We added to this in October last year a service called Kinesis Firehose, and this was to address a very common use case for Kinesis, which was using it as a mechanism to stream data into AWS for long-term persistence. And with Amazon Kinesis Firehose, you can use a single put API call to send data into Amazon S3 or Amazon Redshift for long-term persistence. And we added quite recently another service here which enables you to stream data into Elasticsearch as a persistence target. So you can then index, search, and visualize data that you might be collecting from a Kinesis stream directly in Elasticsearch using that Firehose integration. And later in 2016, we'll add an additional service called Kinesis Analytics. This allows you to run real-time analytics over streaming data, for example, to calculate things like moving averages or forward specific aggregated data to targets of your choice via these analytical models using standard SQL queries, operating them over streaming data. For very large and infrequent data uploads, we announced something that was a little bit of a departure for AWS. We announced our first physical device, something called the Amazon Snowball. When we announced this last year, it had a 50 terabyte capacity. It contains an e-ink shipping label, which you can see here, which is really an embedded device, very similar to the Amazon Kindle, which contains destination info and is also used for operating the device once it gets out onto the customer site. It's a tamper-proof case that can resist impacts of up to 8.5 Gs, and it really looks like a large, ruggedized suitcase or flight case that a DJ might carry records in, or you might put electronics equipment in. And it's used like this by customers. So you request it via the console, it arrives with you, you connect it to your network using the built-in 10 gigabit Ethernet ports, you copy your data onto the device, you put it back into dispatch mode using that e-ink display, Our courier collects it and then returns it back to an AWS region. And you can parallelize these devices. So if you connect 10 of them into your DMZ, you've got the throughput there of 100 gigabit network connection. Now, the latency is high because you've got to wait for the truck to come and take the data back. But there's nothing that's got more bandwidth than a large vehicle full of hard drives, right? Just high latency. So we've announced some changes to this quite recently. Most interestingly, I think, for people that are here in the room, we announced availability in the EU island region. We ship the devices to 28 countries across the EU, which of course includes Sweden. Return them back to EU island, to our region there, and load your data and make it available there. We also announced a new physical device with 80 terabytes capacity, which gives about 60% more usable capacity than the previous 50 terabyte device. So if you do have large volumes of data that you want to move into AWS, this is a very good tool to use for that. It's also a pretty cool device. And then the last pattern here is these medium and often uploads. So this has been used forever by customers that have been taking advantage of AWS. It's the default option that we had at day one, which is direct data upload via our API. We were thinking recently about whether we could improve this. If you're pushing data to AWS and you have large size objects, you have a very large number of objects that you need to move and therefore high volume, or you're just a long way from an AWS endpoint in one of those 12 regions around the world, you can find that there are some limitations here that are really to do with the way in which IP, Internet Protocol networks, are built and operated. The introduced latency that exists on the network can be a bottleneck. So we announced very, very recently a service that makes use of those 54 edge locations that I've mentioned a few times to speed up data transfer to and from AWS for these medium-sized frequent uploads. It's called Amazon S3 Transfer Acceleration, and we do what I just described. We accelerate transfers using our edge network, so your session endpoint will be in one of these edge locations around the world, and then we optimize the network from that edge location back into our origins where we have our S3 infrastructure located. So we can achieve performance boosts here of up to 300% in some cases, or in most cases, and actually in some cases significantly faster than that. And there is no cost for this service unless we detect that we have improved the rate at which you transfer data during the transfer. Then there is a small charge for the acceleration service. And maybe the best thing about it is you configure it like this. You go into your S3 console, you go into your bucket, you'll see a new S3 transfer acceleration section in the console there. Just tick enabled. You'll see an endpoint for your bucket that you then use. Click save, and that's it. So it's super simple to configure. It's already in use by several customers. You may not have heard of some of these, but Frame.io provides a video collaboration service enabling video creators to work concurrently on video assets. They achieved a performance boost of 500%, so 5x. Huddle, it's video analysis for sports teams, where they'll provide coaches with video playback of what their players are doing so they can use that for performance analysis. They dramatically reduced their average time to for ingest, cutting it by about 50%. And then Jaunt, it's cinematic VR recording. I advise you to check these guys out. They've got a giant sphere that's covered in cameras, and the sphere takes lots and lots of images, and then they composite that together to make 360 image videos that you can view on an Oculus Rift or other VR device. They were managing to reduce their transfer from 12 hours for a large video chunk down to about 4. So again, they got around a 300% improvement. So those are different opportunities, different capabilities that we have for data transfer that match different use cases. If you want to discuss any of those in more detail, I advise grabbing one of our essays on the AWS booth a little bit later in the day. Now, the second half of this section, as I mentioned, was about customers. So all about data, we've covered that. What about connecting with customers? And there's obviously a huge megatrend here, which is the move to mobilization. So mobile is becoming the first platform, and the traditional PC interface is becoming a secondary platform for many users. And there's very strong adoption of AWS amongst customers that are building and scaling and operating high-scale mobile applications today. Supercell we've already talked about, Periscope we've already touched, but also Netflix, Airbnb, Tinder, Shazam, Etsy, and a lot of other customers are building mobile backends in AWS. And to talk a little bit more about this and about the convergence between mobile and desktop experiences, I'd like to invite to the stage Erik Fjellberg, who is the founder and CEO at Quinyx. And Eric's going to be joined in a few minutes by Alex Sakouris, who is the head of DevOps on his team.
All right, so do we have sound? Perfect. So thanks a lot for that introduction, Ian, and we're very happy to be here. So my name is Erik, and I'm the CEO and founder of Quinyx. And the reason I founded this business was actually that I discovered a problem while working one summer at McDonald's in high school. At McDonald's, I discovered that they had a huge challenge in terms of workforce management. Every time someone wanted to book a shift or swap a shift, the restaurant manager went into the back office with this huge telephone list and started dialing around to find replacements. My idea was to build a fully cloud-based solution so that the employees themselves would be able to log in, see their schedules, book shift, and interact with each other. McDonald's became the first customer, and we rolled out with their 12,000 users across Sweden, and we quickly realized that there was a big opportunity for this solution outside McDonald's as well. So in 2008, we raised our first round of finance and started to scale the business. Today, we're a bit over 400 customers, 200,000 concurrent business users. We've grown the team to a bit over 100 employees. We have a strong focus on engineering, and the 35 engineers that we have are based here at the Stockholm office. And the mission that we work with today is really to help create a smiling workforce by providing the most user-friendly workforce management solution, which today includes scheduling, time and attendance, task management, and also forecasting and budgeting around the, all the KPIs and metrics that you need in order to have the right amount of people at the right place. The customers we engage with are leading brands within each industry. So we've grown within fast food with companies like Burger King, TGI Fridays, Dunkin' Donuts, and others. We engage with big retailers and grocery chains like Axfood, Norgesgruppen. We run big healthcare providers like Capio, Humana, gym chains like Sats, and many other companies. Now, I can assure you that workforce management and scheduling in particular is a mission-critical process for these businesses. They would not run without Quinyx, and therefore they have the highest requirements in terms of performance, availability, and reliability on our services. On top of that, as Ian mentioned, we are offering our solution on all types of devices, and we can see a huge increase on the usage of our mobile apps, which Alex will comment on a bit later as well. What's really exciting with workforce management is also the user adoption that it drives. So we have close to 2 million logins now per month, and about 900,000 facilitated shift changes through the mobile apps. And looking back to what I experienced at McDonald's, if we save 1 hour per facilitated shift change, this metric alone makes it that we save 900,000 hours for our customers per month, which is, I think, around 470 man years, which is quite amazing. So about 2 years back, when Alex, myself, and the team reviewed our hosting strategy for the future, there were a few areas that we focused on in particular. The first one is international scalability, and we came from a managed hosting environment, and it would have been amazingly expensive for us to scale it to additional continents. And Quinyx today, we are mostly present in Northern Europe, but we're planning to go into North America and other parts of the world soon as well. So international scalability was a key challenge that we looked into. Data security and trust. Well, looking back at the type of clients that we engage with, I can promise you that at every sales meeting that I attend, the question comes up from our customers, which is, how do you take care of our data? Me as a customer, we are very, very concerned about our employee data because it's contract details, it's payroll information, all that sort of stuff. So they ask us the question, how do we manage this in the best possible way? And it's key for us to empower our salespeople with the right type of information, and of course also to manage this in the best possible way. Number 3, significant usage growth. We're growing the business at quite high pace, and we needed a hosting partner that could really back that up in an efficient manner. And then we have number 4, which I think might actually be the most important one, which is enabling DevOps agility. And looking when you're building a SaaS company and you compete against older legacy providers and all sort of different companies, the DevOps agility is, I would say, perhaps the most important competitive advantage that we have. Because if you can release new functionality, bug fixes and improvements to your customers once per month, once per week, or every day, while your competitors, they send out a CD drive or post something every quarter or every year, you're definitely going to win the game against the competitors. And when we looked into hosting strategies, we thought it would be extremely important to choose a partner who could really make us reap the benefits of being a true SaaS provider. So taking all this into consideration, we went with Amazon. We took that decision about 1.5 years ago, and we're live with Amazon fully with all production environments, dev environments since a bit of a year back. And I will let Alex comment a bit on the setup that we decided to go for.
Thank you. I'm Alex. I'm one of the 2 DevOps engineers here at Quinyx. The other half of the team is somewhere here at the audience as well. Yeah, waving hands. So here we can see a very brief overview of our platform. It's a pretty standard tier web application split into 2 availability zones. Multiply that by 3, 4 to count in the development environments as well. We mostly use EC2 instances for now, but we're also using some S3, mainly as a cold storage. The main benefit of moving to Amazon is what you can see at the top of the slide. All our infrastructure right now lives as code inside the Git repository. And that enables us to use tools like SaltStack or Terraform to manage everything as code. So we can provision instances, provision applications on them, and change the real-time configuration of each application when we need it. Here are some sample graphs, and yes, what we gained from Amazon, agility. First of all, the number of requests that we get month by month is increased by around 10%. That would not have been possible to accommodate if we were not in Amazon, where we can scale up when we want. The other is the number of platform changes that we perform. Before we moved on to Amazon, we were using, as Eric said, the managed hosting solution. I can let you guess when we did the move to Amazon. Yes, October. Before that, we were doing around 30 changes per month. After that, it's more than 100 on average. Now, we're changing this approximately the same amount of stuff, but we're now able to do it in smaller changes and change the things when we want them and not have to wait to do it in bulk during maintenance windows and such. The future with Amazon. First of all, we plan to use more AWS services and use the ones that we're using now a bit further to their extent. We're planning on using Route 53 and Elastic Container Service for sure. Also, we want to expand to new regions. As Eric said, we're expanding internationally. So right now, we have our main data center in Frankfurt, our backup data center in Ireland, but we're very soon planning to expand to the US region, both east and west. And I will leave the closing to Eric.
All right, thank you, Alex. So just quickly in summary, again, the mission statement and what we work with at Quinyx every day is to help create a smiling workforce. And Amazon is really a key partner for us to be able to work with that mission, because our solutions needs to be delivered with good performance, they need to be available, and they need to be secure. And I think on top of being that type of strategic partner to us, I also think that Amazon has helped both Alex and myself to enjoy work over the past 12 months. Amazon's so-called customer obsession has really been, I think, both important and appreciated by myself and the team. So we look forward to a long-term partnership with Amazon. If you want to learn more about Quinyx, our services, or how we use Amazon, we actually have a booth out here today, so just feel free to drop by if you have any questions. And thanks a lot for attending. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, so great stuff from the Quinyx team there, thank you. And do visit them outside in the expo area. We actually have several of the startups that we work with here in the Nordics that are in that little area of the expo outside. I encourage you to talk to all of them, and of course spend some time with the team from Quinyx. So what we're seeing here with mobile development in the cloud is that developers aren't just thinking about what runs on the devices, what runs on the iOS, Android, or other mobile platform that they're going to be connecting. They're also increasingly thinking about how they can build scalable and secure back-end services to support their apps. And believe it or not, the same services come into play here from a data and content perspective as come into play in the AWS native apps that I talked about earlier in the session. So using DynamoDB S3 in conjunction with RDS at the back end is a very common pattern here. But we have additional services for mobile developers, high volume push notifications through a service called SNS Mobile Push, and the ability to very simply and quickly integrate analytics into mobile apps so that you can observe your users' journeys, track daily and monthly average usage, and even build specific metrics triggers for custom goals that you might have in specific versions of the app that you might be experimenting with. So it's a very powerful platform for supporting mobile developers that want to operate at scale and with high security. And you can couple this with Lambda and the API gateway together with another service called Amazon Cognito for identity management, and really start to decouple some of the compute activities that would typically run on the device, carry some of that activity back in the cloud. It can enable you to offload, but it can also enable you to break the connection between wanting to update application functionality and features and having, therefore, to resubmit your app through one of the popular app stores. If you decouple the features that you're working on and put them back in the cloud, your pace of change for your mobile apps can be that much higher. Changing them multiple times per day is not uncommon. And one of the areas that we've been focusing on here is Cognito. I've mentioned it quite a few times in the course of the session. This enables you to assign permissions to work with AWS services to anonymous or to identified mobile application users. And in this case, mobile application user means iOS or Android user or a user of the AWS browser-side Java SDK. So you can also use this with web applications in a similar fashion. It enables you to focus on the policies that you want to attach to users rather than on identity management. And from day one, what we provided here was integration with a broad range of different public identity providers, things like Facebook, Twitter, OpenID, and developer-provided authentic identities. But we're getting feedback from customers that they wanted to do more. So we've recently announced a service called AWS Cognito Identity. And this enables you to create a fully managed identity pool that runs inside AWS. Very easy user management. The workflows for registering and controlling your users are provided using Lambda functions. It supports multi-factor authentication out of the gate, not out of the box, and built-in email and phone number verification. So it's a fully featured service for mobile developers that want to manage identity at scale. If you are building mobile apps, take a look at this and see whether it can simplify and unburden you of some of the heavy lifting that's associated with identity management. So I'm going to close up the keynote with this last theme, which is about not settling for the status quo. How can you transition into the cloud? It's simpler for organizations that are building from scratch. One of the best things about being in a startup or working for a startup is that you have a completely blank sheet of paper at day one. Okay, you can draw the ideal architecture for your application or service. You can build that using the most modern frameworks, the most modern tools, and you can cover ground much more quickly when you don't have legacy. But that's just not the reality for larger organizations. Larger organizations are typically characterized by having a lot of IT assets. Probably quite a few people in the room come into work every day and work with applications that are 5, 10, or even 15 years old, right? Yeah, a few people are nodding their head. Who enjoys that, by the way? Okay, a few less people nodding their head. Okay. So, patterns for adoption in enterprises are very well established now. We've got some very clear trends that we can see. It's very common for customers to start experimentation in the cloud, and I'll explain some of those experimental patterns in a second, but then quickly move on to digital transformation. So this is building new products, building new service experiences for customers that are enabled by the agility that AWS offers to our customers. One of the best examples, and one that I really like to call out, is Philips Healthcare. They've integrated their medical imaging devices with AWS. So if you go into a hospital and there's a Philips X-ray or MRI machine there, customers, the hospitals, the healthcare providers, have the option to store that data in AWS. So they don't have to worry about scaling, they don't have to worry about compliance because we hold a HIPAA-compliant standard in North America for our S3 storage service. And they can essentially run their machines, store the medical data in the cloud, and then clinicians can collaborate on that to get better and faster diagnostic outcomes for their patients. So it's transforming a business process and actually enabling Philips to have a much more enduring and regular relationship with their customer as well. Lots of other examples here. I'm not going to dive into the others, but you can find, once again, details of all these different use cases on the AWS website. And what we see in terms of adoption is that customers quite often start with development and test, then altogether new applications which can ignite a desire to really drive that digital transformation agenda much more aggressively, starting with new products and services and new digital experiences, new mobile apps. Then customers often go to analytics, getting better insight into their customers, and then having proven the cloud in production use cases for these customer-facing workloads, they'll start on data center migration, mission-critical applications, and arrive at this destination of all-in. This is an increasingly common place for customers to reach. Here's a sample of organizations that have taken that step and have essentially said, we're no longer going to build data centers, we're no longer going to buy IT infrastructure using our capital resources and own and operate that ourselves. Instead, we're going to make use of the AWS cloud as the default platform upon which we'll build the future technology that supports our organization and helps us serve our customers. Now, getting there, it's quite common for customers to use hybrid architectures to integrate the cloud with their existing application landscape, with their existing architecture. And the reason for this is pretty simple. You know, it's not uncommon for large organizations to have 2,000 plus applications. I remember from my time in telecoms early in my career, we had substantially more apps than that. And actually our workforce wasn't that big a multiple of that number. So we had a lot of apps and a high ratio of apps per employee. And this is very, very common. Probably there's a lot of people in the room that have the same situation. So it's common, and it's really impossible to flip a switch and move those 2,000 applications to the cloud overnight, right? I mean, you just can't do that. So you'll have this hybrid phase, and we've got a variety of different services that enable customers to integrate the AWS cloud with pre-existing or on-premises resources that they might already be owning and already be operating. And these span a variety of different service areas. We already talked about Marketplace, but there are also services for integrating backups. Many common enterprise backup providers integrate with AWS, and you can store your backup data in the AWS cloud. We have tools for integrated deployment, software development lifecycle management across on-premises or owned and operated infrastructure in the AWS cloud, integrated management using familiar tools that you might already use, identity with federation that we touched upon earlier when we were talking about IAM, and also integrated networking, once again making use of VPC and Direct Connect that we've already talked about quite extensively during the session. One example of a customer that's done this and ended up in this model of phased strategic migration is Capital One, who I talked about earlier in the context of their cloud custodian open source project. But they've gone through this pattern of experimentation, innovation labs, mobile application pilots, enabling and enhancing developer productivity in the cloud by using AWS-focused hackathon activities, which, by the way, our SA team can support you with if that's something that you're interested at doing at scale inside your organization. Then development and test. And most recently at AWS reInvent last year, they announced that their new mobile banking app, so the primary customer interaction channel for their customers in North America, was running entirely on AWS. And the CIO of Capital One, Rob Alexander, said something very interesting during his talk. He said, over time, he'd come to realize that he could be more secure in AWS than he could be in his own owned and operated data centers, which is a real fundamental shift in thinking. So how can we support customers with migration? Training and certification, we've got our team here today, helping you build the right skills foundation to make more use of the cloud. Data migration with the tools that I've already talked about today. Database migration with a specific service for this called the AWS Database Migration Service. It's relatively new, but already over 1,000 customers have taken advantage of this service to migrate databases to AWS. We support engine-to-engine migration, so your engine running on your premises or in your private infrastructure to the same engine running on AWS. And with the schema migration tool, we also support migration between different database engines. And this can be an important tool for allowing customers to take advantage of new AWS technology like Amazon Aurora. It's a highly scalable drop-in replacement for MySQL that offers enterprise database performance, durability, and recoverability at about the 10th the cost of enterprise database licensing. And this can be accessed by using tools like our database migration service and our schema migration service to get your databases into AWS and take advantage of some of these benefits. And this is a road that many customers have already been down, as you can see from some of the examples of customers that are making use of Aurora today on this slide. And there's one other important component of migration, which is application migration. I want to just talk quickly about another new service announcement here before I close the session, which is a service called the AWS Application Discovery, or AWS ADS. And this is a new pre-announced service, not available yet, but it will be available in preview in the coming weeks and months. And this enables you to automatically discover your application inventory. One of the hardest parts of migrating to AWS, if you're a very large customer with a lot of different applications in service, is identifying dependencies, where those applications map to underlying infrastructure, how the migration of those applications to AWS can be managed in a way that assures that you're going to have good performance, that your data is going to have the right chain of custody and be maintained appropriately. And we're going to provide this service with an open data format and a public API that gives partners and customers more opportunity to integrate with pre-existing ISV and SI partner migration services. Some of those partners are here today, as you know, and we have a very broad ecosystem of AWS consulting partners that can help larger customers with more complexity tackle some of that complexity and accelerate the rate at which they can take advantage of some of the benefits that AWS offers. And that really completes the portfolio of migration services. And I said earlier that application migration service, that discovery service, will be available in preview in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that on the AWS blog and other communication channels that you might use. So I'm going to close up now. I just want to quickly recap what we've talked about. So we talked about removing constraints, how you can use the cloud to create new products and services and break down some of the barriers that might prevent you from doing that in a speedy, responsive way whilst maintaining the compliance and security obligations that you've got. We talked about observing and connecting, how you can use AWS services to get more insight from your data, how you can connect with customers on the increasingly prevalent mobile platforms that they're using today. And we've also talked about challenging the status quo, how you can get large pre-existing applications and portfolios of applications into AWS in a controlled and effective manner. Now, these are the fundamentals of startup innovation here in the Nordics, and I hope that you can use these ideas consistently to reinvent your technology, and as a result of that, reinvent your businesses. I'd like to thank you for joining the keynote today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the program at the summit here in Stockholm. Please do take advantage of the technical sessions, and I hope that you get the knowledge out of today that you're looking for. Thank you.